guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about books with really bad, in my opinion, film adaptations. I have a whole series on books with really amazing film adaptations, and they do exist. In my opinion, it is very hard to get a perfect, I do not think one exists, film adaptation of a book. The closest thing to perfection for me would be Lord of the Rings, so you can see where I'm coming from. That is my ideal idea of a very, very well done film adaptation of a very popular book. But more often than not, these things fall flat or just don't work for the majority of fans. Now, I will say that this is going to be a bit controversial because I know that this series was, I believe, pretty well received. It had its critics, and I am one of them, so let's get into that. Today I'm going to be talking about the series Anne with an E, which is a series adaptation of Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. And I love this book. And this actual cover is from the 1985 version of Anne of Green Gables, which is amazing. It is also a nearly perfect adaptation, in my opinion. It does not follow the book entirely faithfully, but it is beautiful. It captures the imagination, the spirit of the book. It totally shows the romantic scenery that you're reading about. It's filmed on Prince Edward Island. It is gorgeous and a glorious adaptation, in my opinion. Just everything about it hits the right note for me. The casting, the scenery, the language, it's just got that Anne of Green Gables spirit, in my opinion, and I love that adaptation. So let's talk about Anne with an E. This is also filmed, I believe, in Canada, and it probably on Prince Edward Island as well. This series is different, and for me, it did not work for many reasons. I understand why people would like it, and I will say I don't think this was made for Anne of Green Gables fans because I think it was made for people who haven't read the series and have no intention of reading this series, which kind of exposes Anne to a wider audience of people who may not have interest in the books. I also feel that they went into this with a very clear idea of wanting to put a very modern spin on things. Things that are addressed in the show would never have been talked about in that time and would never have been thought of or addressed in the way that this show presents it. I think that's interesting, and if they had gone into it saying this is a very modern spin, we want to do it this way, it's going to be a loose adaptation, I would have said that's very interesting. Like, it definitely is that. But to me, the casting fell a bit flat in most places. And although being closer in age to the actual book girl in the story, Anne is cast a bit younger, which is good. I didn't like her as Anne very much. Not the actress's fault. I just didn't connect with her as Anne. She didn't seem very sympathetic. She, despite having gone through a bunch of very horrible situations, is a difficult person to like. She's very moody. She comes off as being very self-absorbed almost. There's times where you just don't feel like she connects with other people in a way that you understand, and she almost has this like idealized version of herself where she's very high up here and everyone else is kind of and it comes off like that, especially with her treatment of Gilbert when his father dies, and her telling him like, well, she should take his advice because, he should take her advice because she's an orphan and she knows what it's all about. And like really missing what's going on, and I did not like her at all. The casting of Gilbert was good. I thought Diana Barry was also cast pretty well. She's a very sweet, sympathetic girl, very much like the book. The casting of Anna and Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert didn't work for me. I didn't like them. The whole series is filmed very modern, the intro is very modern. It took me completely out of the Anne of Green Gables romantic, beautiful scenery that you're surrounded with being in Canada and Prince Edward Island. It just smacks you so hard with this is the message we want and this is the modern take we're going for, that I didn't like it. I couldn't decide what this series wanted to be. Does it want to be a loose adaptation? Does it want to be a faithful retelling? Does it want to be its own thing? It just didn't work for me. And it felt like it wanted to have all of it. No! Darn it. I I didn't turn my ringer off, obviously. It felt like it wanted to have all of its cake and eat it too, in a way. It wanted to have the costumes and the scenery of a beautiful Anne of Green Gables adaptation, but nothing else. It wanted to be able to insert all of the modern ideals that it had for this series, as well as putting in pretty modern language. Some of the way that they're talking, I noticed especially with Gilbert, it was very modern and didn't fit with the scenery surrounding it, which also took me out of it. I wasn't able to fully immerse myself into this retelling at all. I will say, let me look at my notes. There are several characters that get treated more harshly or changed completely to fit what the story wants to tell you. So that bothered me, and that I felt that this wasn't really an Anne of Green Gables story at all. It was a story about a girl named Anne who's an orphan. And I wish it would have been marketed as a very loose retelling, because then I might have just seen it as they had some ideas, they wanted a recognizable name, and to have this, character in their story, which is fine. But when you're saying it's Anne with an E, it's Anne of Green Gables, I have an idea and a vision of what that will be, and it just was hard to even get in my head, like, this is where we're at, because it's so not how I think of Anne or Gilbert or any of those characters. It's just darker. It's not as enjoyable, and they added in things that just didn't seem to be necessary to make it more sad. And I understand that sad shows, sad movies are a thing. Like, This Is Us is a thing. Like, all of these shows that are tearjerkers, that are constantly pulling on your heartstrings, making you want to cry, that's kind of a trend. I don't enjoy it, but I understand it's a trend. And so they made Anne's life harsher. She was beaten. She was tortured at her the place that she went. And none of this is true to the book. This is all added in to add more to Anne's story to make her seem sad and pathetic and, worthy of all this pity when she's kind of not a very nice person. And Anne is exposed to things, that she then says and shares, so that you can see she's had a very hard upbringing and dealt with a lot of very disturbing situations. So there is that, but even the things that should have been uplifting in Anne's life, they change. So when Anne first goes to school, Anne is actually very well received at school. Anne is a confident young lady. She loves people. People like her. She might not have been the most popular girl, but she is immediately received as a friend by Diana Barry, and the other girls also receive her in kind. The only person she ever really has issues with is Josie Pye and Gilbert, because of the whole slate thing. But Anne is not treated badly in the show. She's ostracized. They tell her where she needs to sit. They make all of the girls seem totally cliquish and evil, when I guess that makes for better drama, but I didn't care. I didn't like any of the girls, and they're all going to eventually be friends. And so they're not, it's like these girls are going to be in the story, and I just didn't like it. The other thing that is added is things like Anne getting her period. So if you ever felt like, oh, I really want to know what Anne would be like as a really moody, unlikable teenager, whining about her life and her moods and how she's unhappy. Like, this is how a real person would react, but it's not in the book. Like, it's nothing like that. There is no Anne getting her period and washing blood out of her clothes. And if you really felt that that was missing from the book, okay, here it is. Like, I'm glad that you got that if that's something you really felt was necessary to the story of Anne. I did not. And Anne, of course, has very modern ideas about, oh, well, how come we can't talk about our periods, because we should be able to talk about them. Boys, don't have to deal with this. And she has confrontations with the boys where she feels the need to assert herself and, attack them, and they attack back. And it's this back and forth of her trying to prove that she's as good as them. She's just as good. She is just as good. But the Anne of the book doesn't need to do that. Anne never doubts that she's as good as Gilbert. She never doubts that she's as good as anybody else. She proves it by constantly being the best at things. That's why she has the intense competition with Gilbert in the book. She's always striving to be the best, and she shows that she is. She doesn't need to get down in the dirt with the boys and I'm as good as you, I'm better, I'm just as good, it just felt like they wanted to have this feminist, retelling and throw Anne in there, which makes no sense. And I did not like it. I have no problem with the ideas. It's just the vessel in which they chose to present them. They didn't need to have this be an Anne retelling. And I actually think that it would have worked much better to have it be an adaptation of Emily of New Moon, because Emily is more of that scrappy, get in your face, argue, fight kind of girl. And that's not who Anne was. I didn't feel anything for these characters. The whole second season, I only watched the first season, I will say. The whole second season seems to be built around these borders that ended up getting taken in at Green Gables, and they're going to cause some issues. And I was like, where is this coming from? But they have to add in a bunch of bulk because this is going to be multi-seasons, so I don't know. It was just boring. Let me check my notes again. The other things that I'm going to just say really quickly about this adaptation is the way that it deals with the other characters as far as not being faithful to the book. It doesn't just take Anne and put her in this, kind of more modern idealist world. It drags along the other characters as well, of course. So in accordance with this need, sorry, my air conditioner is going to come on and off. It's a hot day today. In accordance with this being a more modern retelling and much darker and sad, Matthew at one point, contemplates suicide. Matthew also is shown to have had a former love interest who's still around, and these characters are introduced for no other reason that seems to bulk out the story. We're adding bulk to the story to make it more interesting or to add time. Marilla is also shown to have had a former love, which she did, I believe, in the book. It was very briefly touched on. And I kind of like that it showed that. I like the idea of seeing a little bit of Marilla's backstory, but Marilla regretting her life choices and feeling like she didn't have a choice and getting mad at Matthew because she had to stay home and take care of him and be a wife and mother. Oh, wait, she's not. So when they're drawing that comparison of Marilla seeming mad about making her life choices because she felt stuck, she didn't make any of the choices that most people were making at that time. She didn't get married. She didn't have kids. All on her own choice. And the Marilla in the books recognized that. It was her choice. Marilla didn't let anybody tell her what to do. And the idea that the show felt the need to show her as trapped or as weak is frustrating because she's not. Don't change people to make them weaker to make a point. You could have done that with any other character. You could have shown any other character that has actually done that. Like maybe Diana's mom is feeling very sad and felt she would have liked to have a different life or a different career. I don't know. But Marilla doesn't feel that way. And so the idea that she suddenly is bitter and angry at Matthew because she is a, old maid at home taking care of him is just ridiculous. That was her choice. She doesn't seem in the book to really regret it. She had her chance at love. She didn't take it. There was an argument. And Marilla has accepted this. Marilla is not the type of person to sit there and go weep, oh, woe is me. I didn't get all the things that society told me I should have had, which I don't apparently want anyway. I don't know. I just feel like the messaging was so pushed so hard, it just didn't even make sense with the characters. It was so much more about the message than it actually fitting in with who these characters are. We just had to have the feminism. We just have to have Marilla feeling this way. We have to have Anne being like this with the boys because that's what we want to show. And I'm not saying these are not worthy messages. I'm not saying that there are not women who felt very trapped and confined in that society, but there were so much better ways of showing it, and it probably was not to do an Anne retelling because that's just not who Anne is. And Anne, at one point somebody says, the pastor, who's evil, of course, and who's not in the book at all. He and his wife love Anne. His wife can't have children in the book, and she is one of Anne's deepest friends and just one of her biggest supporters. But of course, he needs to be evil to tell Marilla that Anne should stay home and become a wife and mother and learn that and not go to school. So yeah, we have to vilify as many people as possible to create this, horrible society for Anne so that she can be a young feminist. And Anne, of course, is very upset by this, which is kind of ridiculous because Anne, if anyone knows the story, grows up to be a wife and mother, and that is what she wants. Anne lives her life. Anne goes to college. Anne has all the things that she could want, and her choice in the end is to marry and to have children. And the show very much demeans that, demeans those choices as if that's lesser, as if Anne had, if she had any agency, if she had any choices in her life, she would never pick those, which is what she has. The series goes on to show her and her children and her life that she loves. but we can't even enjoy that aspect of it or feel that Anne is in any way having those feelings, because Anne has to feel that, you know, that's beneath her. She's made for more. Which, as a wife and mother, yeah, I'm going to say that's pretty darn insulting, actually. And I get that they wanted to modernize this tale, but it just comes off like, here's a big old slap in the face because you're too dumb to realize this, but you shouldn't want to be a wife and a mother. Okay. So I will say one thing I did like and appreciate about this, there was not much, was the expanding upon of Gilbert's character. So we get to see him at home, we see his dad being sick, and Gilbert's character was cast pretty well, like I said, and I did like him. He didn't talk like how Gilbert should have probably talked, but they made a lot of different changes with the language. It's definitely more modern. But I liked it. I thought, yeah, this actually is a really great way of expanding the story and showing him caring for his dad and showing, ding, his life. And I appreciated that. I do think that there was things that this series tried to show and capture that were done better than others. I have no friends every time. Seriously, this is what happens. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I would love to hear if you like this, if you watch the whole series, if you think that it gets better. Talk to me in the comments. And like I said, this is totally my opinion. Please do not get angry at me if you love this series. It's just my opinion, but that's how I felt, and I will talk to you all soon. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.